Hello, Internet. It's time for another Wednesday's serial. This time I'm just going to be running through books my relative order of interest of reading. So there you go. And I'm going to start right off with Atomic Robo, The Savage Sword of Dr. Dinosaur. And part of the reason I was so intrigued to just launch into this title is because I'm not sure where I'm at with Atomic Robo right now. Like, this could have just been kind of a bum run, like the last 5 issues. I just feel this hasn't been as intriguing. What's always been kind of bizarre about Atomic Robo is that there really hasn't been much of a supporting cast. It's usually Robo set in different time periods, and there's a villain and maybe like a couple people associated with them, and usually like the people Robo's running with, and that's only like 2 or 3 people. But now he's back in modern day, and they kind of have a small amount of action scientists applied to all this. You know, what's interesting is this kind of lightly has played off the last run, and it's looking like it's going to, this leads right into the next chunk, which really defeats the point of them publishing it in these 5-issue kind of mini-series-esque chunks, because now immediately you're going to be started with, if you picked up the next one not having picked up this one, you're going to wonder how it started off there. Ultimately, you'll probably find it won't be a big deal, but since the villain's going to be connected again, I almost feel like we're headed into serious territory here, and maybe they should have made this a 10-issue chunk, and that would have been a bigger thing. But I feel like this book has enough of a following now and a time that they could do that, and maybe if they entered with that mentality, it would have been written a little better. And that's something that's been getting me. The art's been feeling a little more webcomic-y than quirky, I guess. Maybe that's just because a friend pointed out to me, but I feel like the backgrounds have been much more simplistic, except for a few notable frames here and there where they really need to establish setting, and then just kind of have blasé palettes. I feel this page sums that up. You'll just see kind of swaths of just sky, which is fine sometimes, but it's just a lot of the comic just feels like that. It just feels kind of empty. And so I feel like also part of the reason why the quality in this book is going down is this is now kind of an enterprise. There's this book, or there's kind of the main book. There is the secondary book. They're now coming out with a role-playing game. There's video games associated to it, and I kind of wonder if they're kind of stretching out too thin when they could focus and make the main product more worthwhile once again, but what the hell, they're there. Meanwhile, the antithesis of that is Chew, where we have these segments, and this family recipes chunk is kind of interwinding and playing with a whole bunch of stuff, but it's still really just Chew 39, and you're on board or you're not at this point. Some of the biggest laughs, craziest mysteries, and the book is so inventive. You really can have an amazing mystery and, honest to God, not know what's coming next, but not feel like they're keeping lame stuff from you or something. Like, this has just been, as always, an amazing ride. If you're not reading Chew, what's wrong with you? Amazing stuff. Psychedelic chogs, crazy fruit, amazing food-based abilities, and it's all coming together. And the terrorists of Egg were shut down. What more do you want in an issue of comics? Alright. Zero. This is the best comic like no one is reading. In this issue, we transfer from just being a crazy spy comic that revels in being a comic, which should be enough for anyone, into hints of real bizarre sci-fi esque landscapes and some ideas coming through. What's really interesting about this comic, especially in the initial part, is it kind of touched on something that I feel about my comic reviews here at times, where it speaks about things so generally, and with a certain amount of just pronoun and expectation that whoever's taking it in is following along, but it still works. and it's all based on context, and all the words early, like in the first third of this comic, kind of hit that, but then the images provide all this context and flavor to the point where it comes back, and you have a really quiet moment here, which is normally something I'd complain about, where this is just a quiet, but this is not a waste of space. This is a progression. It's 3 beats, and the artist that they have on this issue is clearly someone who gets pacing in comics. He knows when to use a 4-panel. He knows when to use the grid. He knows when to use that 3-panel, kind of that landscape look. And and there's certain times where it goes monochromatic, and every one of these issues is kind of held to a certain color scheme, but this is looks, I don't know, just a little bit more what you'd see from an image book, I guess, normally, and it just all comes together to create this. The story in and of itself isn't even all that complex. It's just kind of the way it's told and the way it feels as it's being told really works, which is just the mark of good storytelling. Not that it's all these insane crazy layers, but that it's being told at just the right amount, and it doesn't feel minimalist at all. So I'm still trying to wrap my head around this book, and I'm still trying to figure out what I can say that isn't really spoiling it. So I might have to revisit and return and come back to this sometime to talk about it with you guys. And please, if anyone picks it up, I would love to hear your impressions. Alright, Hawkeye 16, we're dealing with Kate Bishop again, and I know I've been kind of down on it since they did the whole Kate to LA thing, but this issue felt good. It felt like, and I kind of realized why, like it felt like a weird throwback, but it's being told in this kind of more modern way, and I realized it was about someone who's the hero trying to help someone else out, because that's what they do. And it's just one of those, like, thinking back into all the superhero stuff and how wrapped in, how personal everything needs to be. This wasn't that. It was just another person reaching out to help another person, and I feel like maybe something's been lost with the whole superhero idea, with everything needing to be so epic and so dramatic. Pulling back a little bit, this resonated a lot better. It's just a fun little issue with her helping out this crazy old 60s music guy and basically everyone hating her, and there's an awesome little bit with her trying to get info from the library, this old funny nutty holding her up, and yes to this issue. More of that, please, I guess. Although I guess in a way that's the worst thing a fan can say is more of that, please. But what else are you really left with? Either I want more of this, or I want something else, or boo that. At the end of the day, really, what else can you do as a fan? I don't know. That's a different question. Sorry. Something from Neil Gaiman quote once. X-Ladies 9, and the tension builds. I don't know, this is very much setting up the threat of the sisterhood tied to the Akia threat from the original arc of this book. And I guess that kind of is a little annoying, because it used to be had more of a villain a week sort of thing, or, kind of rotate through some villains. Here it's like we have one villain that they defeated, and then immediately in the next arc it's back. So it's just kind of like, well, they didn't really defeat much of anything then? I don't know, it kind of undercuts what's happened a bit before, except that they had a fight and barely got by. So it'll be curious to see with all the interesting players on the board, and it is kind of nice to have, a pro-femme book, whatever, that's cool, but I think that's really the most compelling aspect of this. Beyond that, it's just kind of, okay, we're gearing up for a big cat fight. So Hopefully once we actually get there, it will have another layer or two to really make it a bit more interesting than just a giant throwdown between some characters we might have not seen fight before. Wonder Woman 27, and this book just keeps going. There's a cool little moment at the beginning about, there's this great line about how gods don't hold grudges, they hold thrones. And it's really tempered by a few pages later. You see Hera, who's been left alone. She's cuddled into the corner of the room. And she talks about how she used to covet being alone and having some time to herself. But now when she's alone, she's just afraid that she's going to die that way. And it's this really cool take on how, in a way, morality is part of what keeps us humble. It's kind of a limitation that keeps us on a level, because if you can always make up for it or always push forward, maybe there's not necessarily a need for that. It's kind of an abstract way, but the way that it's written is really interesting, because Azzarello really taps into what makes these characters gods and not superheroes, and what makes them not superheroes but just heroes, and what just makes people who are on that level. And it's just it's really interesting to see that, and that aspect of it really comes forward, and how necessity and need and how that informs where we're at. And that really was kind of all throughout this issue, and I really like how that idea is kind of tapped to and played into this larger whole of this crazy story that's really just been running from the beginning. So Wonder Woman's really great, and I'm glad that people kind of pushed me to read it, because it's definitely one of the stronger titles that's coming out mainstream comic-wise right now. Harley Quinn 2, and she goes to save the doggies from the pound. If this is the way this book's going to keep going, I'm totally on board. This is just crazy and fun. And I did notice, and I hadn't noticed this before, a little note, Harley Quinn created by Paul Dini and Bruce Timm. It's kind of fun to see something like that in a book with people who are still alive. So, yeah, I don't know. This is just a fun book. It looks gorgeous, and it keeps moving, and DC needs more of this. If you weren't sure about this, I highly recommend checking this book out. It's been one of the best things going. Batman and Two-Face 27. This is moving forward and taking some bizarre paths. Finally, I feel like we're getting a play of the actual story here. We're past trying to reestablish things that don't need reestablishing, and we're in the beats of what's going on, and we're seeing a lot of what Harvey Dent did and how it's informing the events now. And and what's really interesting about it is, Batman's a player in here, but barely. He's really not a big part of the issue, except for one double-page spread where they're trying to push some stuff, but in a way, this is more building Gotham and doing all that stuff that supposedly Scott Snyder's doing in his book, where you get this play of the Gordons and, Bruce Wayne and then Dent and these other players, and how it kind of creates this feeling of this city and these players going on that really works, that very few comics are able to really encapsulate. And so, another big thumbs up to this book. Alright, Batman 27 has me on board for this whole 0 years shebang. There's a bit in here with Gordon where they talk about what was discussed with the previous issue about him kind of giving in to the corruption in a way, and then you see it's kind of like a slip and him trying to see it, but then he pushes into something darker, and you see what makes Gordon, but in a way that seems so much more visceral and specific and character driven than what we ever see in say year one. like, this is very much Gordon's issue, and this is his play here, and we're going to see why it's so important to Batman. There's kind of a weird play with the identity secret there for a moment, but it really sold me on the idea of Gordon here, and pushing why Gordon's really one of the most interesting characters in the Batman universe, and made me think, screw Batman, make this Gordon and just run with it. But beyond that, we finally get a tie that really reveals why there's been some different things going on, and really showing that one thing that we've been really focused on truly was kind of a red herring in the mystery. And I'm really curious to see how that all plays out. Honestly, part of the reason I was trepidatious about this issue was this cover. This cover says that it's going to be a lot more about Dr. Death. Also, the claws coming out of here are just weird. I don't know. It's really almost a good thing when you can say the worst thing about the comic was the cover, because it set up some bizarre expectations, and what was inside was so much more what you wanted and so much more better than you could have predicted. If you've been kind of wavering on this title, I understand, but I really suggest you pick up 27 and let it try to sell you back onto this whole €0 thing, because it's very much been a long haul, and I'm not saying that it's necessarily been worth it for all the issues that have been kind of ho-hum, but this issue is good. So it's been nice to come back and see a bit more of the touch of why the trust that was earned with the previous runs come back and come into this run that's been kind of, I feel, wearing down those who read it. So there's this book called Red Hood and the Outlaws, where Tynion kind of did up for a few months. What's interesting, though, is there's a few pages here that is kind of what kicked off this arc that he started with, and if he didn't try to hold his cards back, but if he'd actually put those pages in earlier, I think the subsequent issues would have read better than they had. Not good, mind you, but better than they had. Because so much of what was frustrating about this arc was that we just kind of had Jason forget his memories, and we felt it was like this weird emotional thing, but it didn't make any sense. And when it was kind of understood that there was a sacrifice he was making for them, supposedly for the good of the world, at a point that it turns out wasn't needed anyway, so it's all pointless, but the idea that he was doing it for something larger than himself resonates much better than him getting rid of his memories for a selfish reason. Also, especially given the fact that it never mattered, and he was never put into any of what would have been his normal life without his memories, so there's no point to that story. It's just this big mystical mumbo-jumbo, and really, when you get to the end of it, this arc did nothing. Nothing changes. Like, it all ends with this big fight against Ra's al Ghul, who was the big bad all along. Ooh, shocking. And then they fight, and then Ra's doesn't really lose, they don't really win, and then everybody gets away, and, like, the status quo is back, and nobody really won or lost a fight. Like nothing happened. Like, it was just a big circle, and then nothing. So, be really curious to see. There's one more Tynion issue, and then we move on to a new creator. Sadly for that new creator, if they don't start the ball rolling right away, if they don't grab me, I'm done with this, because it's unfair, that new creator, but it's just the nature of things. If they don't grab me right away, I have no reason to believe that this book is going to be what it once was, which wasn't even that great. It was just really fun. So, yeah. So that's my books for this week. I hope you don't mind the quick functional reviews. Any questions or comments, you know where those go. And I hope you all have a great weekend. And one quick announcement before I leave. We are slated for another comic book parfait on the Oddfellows Thoughts channel. I am looking forward to it. I'm going to be talking a certain Justice League arc, and I just finished the entire 90s to early 2000s run of Justice League. So I'm kind of excited to talk about just a little chunk of that. If anyone's curious, I could do a larger video on the Justice League now that I have a much better understanding of the Justice League, having brute forced my way through probably one of the most notable chunks of its history. And yeah, keep on reading those comics, peoples.